Hello and welcome back. All right, so in this lesson, I just want to go over 5 basic tools that we're going to be using a lot when we're creating our websites. And the reason why I put them all in one lesson is because they're real simple. There's not a lot of information that we need to go over. So let's quickly go over those 5 tools so you have a better idea of what they are and the keyboard shortcuts for accessing some of those tools. The first one is our Move tool, which we can see with our icon right here is already selected. It's located right here on our toolbar, and we can access it with our keyboard shortcut, which is the letter V. And it basically does what the tool icon name is, which is move elements, layers, objects, whatever you want to call them. I can click on this layer right here and move it, click on this one and move it, but that's all dependent on the tool options that you have set up for this particular tool. Right now I have auto select selected. If I turn that off and I click on this layer, I'm not moving it, I'm moving the other layer. And that's because auto select is turned off. When you turn it on and click on a layer, it will then select that layer in the layers panel, and then you can move whatever layer you clicked on. You can also select either group or layers. So if I have this in a grouped layer and then I click on one of the layers, it's not actually selecting the individual layers. What it's doing is it's actually selecting the group. So if I click on this new group that I just duplicated, we can see that the selection is changing based on what I'm selecting. If I keep it on layer, then I'm going to select that layer inside of that particular group and then I can move it. Personally, I like to leave it on layer. Occasionally I'll move it to group, but most of the time you're going to see layer selected for my particular setup. And of course, we've talked about the alignment tools in a previous lesson, and when you have 2 or more layers selected with the Move tool selected, you can then align them accordingly based on the options that you select from here. So we've already gone over that. We're not going to go over that again. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next tool that I like to use, which is the Eyedropper tool, which is located right here, and the keyboard shortcut for that is the letter I. So right now we have a green color set for the foreground. If I select the Eyedropper tool and click on the background, it changes to white. So this is a great tool for sampling colors on different graphic elements or even photos. If you want to get a specific color from that photo, you can do so with the Eyedropper tool. The next tool is the Marquee tool, which is selected with the letter M, and it's located right here under the Move tool. And it's basically a selection tool, but what I like to use it for is measurements. So I can click and drag out a rectangle, and we can see that the width is 84 pixels and the height is 126 pixels. And I like to use this for spacing out different elements or sections of my website to ensure that they're evenly spaced between each one of those different elements or sections. So I'll show you that when we get into the advanced projects and we start creating some websites. There are some tools to allow us to center and align our elements with the Move tool, but sometimes we need to make a measurement between 2 elements in order to find out exactly the space between them so that we can add the same amount of space to the next section below. That's going to make more sense when we get into the projects. Another one of my favorite tools is the free transform tool. So sometimes I may have a lot of things going on in a particular group, or the number of layers I have is humongous, and sometimes I'll just grab my free transform tool in order to click and drag that layer to a new location versus trying to do it with my Move tool, because maybe the elements are real close together, or maybe that element is really small and I can't really grab it from this viewpoint as far as the zoom level. So if I use my free transform tool, which is Command or Control and the letter T, I'm going to get this little bounding box around it, and then that allows me to move that particular layer because I know I have that layer selected now because I have that free transform tool around it. But I also use it to transform my shapes or my elements, because this will allow me to resize the shape depending on the corner that I select or the side that I select, and then I can resize that particular element as needed. So it has 2 purposes, and we're going to be using that throughout the course as well. Finally, the last tool we're going to need to use is our ruler. I do have a ruler around my document right now. If you don't see a ruler around yours right now, you can use your keyboard shortcut, which is Command or Control and the letter R to show or hide that ruler. You can also go up to View and select Rulers from here to add it. The other thing is the dimensions or the measurement of that ruler. I have it set in pixels right now. If you have something else set, for example, inches or centimeters, then you need to change it to pixels. To do that, just right-click anywhere on the ruler, and then you'll get this pop-up for additional measurement options. So I have inches now, and now I have pixels. So make sure you have your ruler set up to pixels because we're going to be working in pixels for our documents. All right, so that's it for those 5 basic tools. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at another tool that we can use when we're designing our websites to enhance the elements that we created for the website or to create some special effects. And I'll show you how to use that tool in the next lesson. The next tool I want to share with you is the gradient tool, and we're going to use it on a couple of different projects. For this one, it's very noticeable that we have a gradient from top left to bottom right for this background. So I'm going to show you how to create this type of a background with the gradient tool. This one here, we applied a small, subtle type of gradient to the background. It's not as noticeable as the other one, but there is one there, and I'll show you how to create that as well. So let's just go over the basic tool and how we can apply custom colors to our gradient. So the gradient tool is located under the paint bucket tool right here. If we click, we get our pop-out menu, and then we can select gradient tool from here. And then up here at the top, we can see the different colors that are going to be created from that gradient. And we have additional tool options up here as well. The first option is the linear gradient, which will basically create a straight line. And then we have a radial gradient, and then 3 more options as well. The first 2 are the ones that I use the most. I rarely use these 3 here. We can also apply a blending mode to the gradient. We can adjust the opacity. And then by default, I like to have dither and transparency selected, and I keep reverse off. It basically just reverses the order of the colors. So if we want to change the colors of our gradient, we just click on this color bar here, and then we get our gradient editor. So right here we can see the 3 main colors, which are blue, red, and yellow for this particular gradient. And then by default, we have some other options that are pre-installed when you first use Adobe Photoshop. You can load gradients that you download from other artists, or you can create your own and save them to the gradient editor. These are basically presets. So if we click on one of these other options, then this toolbar down here changes based on the option that we select up here. So to create our own, we just need to adjust these different points of the toolbar. And up here at the top is the opacity control. And then down here is where we choose our color. So if I click on this first option right here, we can see black is selected. And if I click on that color bar, then I can change that to any color that I want. If I don't want white down here on the right side, I can click on here and change the color over here as well. So now we have a gradient from yellow to greenish because it's combining or blending the 2 colors in together based on the gradient from one end to the other. And this is the middle point of that gradient. And then all the way over to the right, we have blue. We can adjust the midpoint of this gradient so we have more blue or more yellow depending on what we want to create. And we can see down here in the location, it's showing what percentage of one color versus the other is being applied to that gradient. So if we want it directly in the center, we just type in 50% and then it moves that marker back to 50%. Up here at the top, we can adjust the opacity and not the color. So I can click either here or on the word itself and move to the left or to the right to change the amount of opacity. Same thing with this side as well. And then once we're happy with our new gradient, we can go ahead and save that to our presets. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. I now have my new gradient. Now to add the new gradient to the document, we just click and drag out, and you're going to find a line follows wherever you place it on that document. So I'm going to click up here and drag out, and then we get our little line, and that shows the angle of that gradient that we're going to apply when we release our mouse button. Now if I want a perfectly horizontal or vertical line for my gradient, I can kind of eyeball it, but it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly where that horizontal or vertical line is. So to make things easier, we just hold down our Shift key and it snaps into place, whether it's vertical or horizontal, or even at a 45-degree angle. Once you release, then you get your perfect vertical or horizontal gradient based on how you apply it. We also have a radial gradient, which will create a circular gradient. So those are the two main options that I use when creating gradients for the websites that I create. Typically, I'll just use them for the background, or if I want to blend an image into a colored background, then I can use the gradient along with my masks, my layer masks, to do that as well. And I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on how to use the gradient for creating some unique types of backgrounds for your website designs. Until then, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next Photoshop tool you're going to need to learn how to use when designing websites. Hello and welcome back. All right, another handy dandy tool that I like to use when creating websites is a smart object. We talked about smart objects in the lesson on Layers 101, and we know by looking at this icon right here, or this thumbnail, we have this little icon in the bottom right, and this lets us know that this is a smart object. So in this particular project right here, we will be using smart objects, and we will be in one or two other lessons as well. Now we did go over smart objects already in that lesson on layers, and it's basically allowing you to combine multiple layers into one layer to preserve those layers, and then when you double click on the smart object, you will have a new document open up with the layers within that smart object, and then you can save any adjustments you make to these individual layers, and it will then be updated in the smart object. So if I undo that, we can see I hid this particular part of the frame edge. And of course, we can keep these separate in separate layers, but oftentimes it's easier to combine multiple layers in this fashion so that you don't accidentally delete a specific layer, or if you want to combine those elements for other types of special effects, it still allows you to go back and alter those individual layers and then save it as part of that smart object. But we can go back again and turn that particular layer on that I turned off, and then it will be added back into that particular layer. And oftentimes I will also use this particular tool when I'm creating icons and I have multiple layers that I use to create that icon. Instead of merging all those different layers into one layer, I like to have all those individual layers available again so that I can make adjustments to them if needed later on. If we just merge all the layers of that particular icon together, let's say there's 10 different layers, then we can't go back and make adjustments, and we end up having to recreate that icon from scratch. So in another project, we are going to do that as well. We're going to create some icons, and we're going to merge them into a smart object versus merging them all into one layer. And it's going to make more sense why you're going to want to do that once we get into that particular project. So I just wanted to basically go over again what a smart object is and some of the benefits of why you would want to use a smart object for particular projects. Okay, so that's it for the smart objects. In the next lesson, I just want to briefly talk about the history panel and how to set that up, because it's going to be very essential to have your history panel available, because it will allow you to step back in time if you make a mistake, and we'll explain more about that in the next lesson. All right, so in this lesson, I just want to help you set up your history panel to allow you to go back in time in case you made a mistake, or if you want to start over at a specific point of the project that you're working on. So the history panel can be accessed via the window and then this option right here, history. So we can see my history panel right here, and every time you do something in Photoshop, it records what you did. So if I click on apply now and move that and go back to the history panel, we can see we have an option down here that says move. Well, that's what I did. I moved that particular layer. If I made a mistake and I want to go back to a different point in time, I can just click on the previous step that was recorded, or I can go all the way back to the beginning or somewhere in between. So just by clicking on that, it will move that layer back to where it was originally. So to set this up, we're going to go into preferences because we need to define how many steps we want to record or have Photoshop remember. So if we go up to Photoshop, Preferences, and go down to Performance, you'll get this new dialog box that will allow you to increase or decrease the number of history states that Photoshop will remember. If you're on a PC, Preferences will be found in the File menu. So go ahead, open that up, and as you can see, I have 100 history states being recorded for the projects that I work on. So once I get to 100, that first history state that it remembered will be removed, and then it will add the next one, history state 101, to it. So if I want more history states remembered, I need to increase it, and the maximum is 1000. Now you may say, well, why not just put it at 1000? Well, depending on your computer specs will determine the number of states that you should use, because the more that Photoshop has to remember, the slower your computer will get based on your computer specs. So for my computer, I have 30 gigabytes of RAM, and I've allotted 50% or 15 gigs for Photoshop directly. Yes, I can do 1000 history states, but my computer will get slower as Photoshop continues to remember more and more history states. So you're going to set this up between, I'd say, between 100 and 1000, all depending on how much memory or how much RAM you have available for Photoshop to use. And let's say you choose 1000 to start off with. That may be fine in the beginning of the project, but if you find that your computer is getting slower and slower, you may want to come back and lower this down to something more reasonable, like 100 or 500 or somewhere in between. Again, it's all going to depend on your computer specs. So go ahead, set that up, and you'll be all set with your history panel. Hello, and welcome to the Stamp Tool section of our course. In this section, we're going to learn about the Stamp Tool, which is located right here. In this lesson, we're going to go over the Clone Stamp Tool. The Stamp Tool does work just like a brush, so we can increase or decrease the brush size with our keyboard shortcuts, which are the left and right bracket keys. And then we do have some options up here that we can apply to that Stamp Tool as well. So this particular image is located in your resources folder if you want to follow along or to practice what you learn once you go through this lesson. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these options up here, and then I'll go ahead and show you how to use this tool and give you some tips and techniques for using it. So a lot of these options we've gone over before in previous lessons, so I'm just going to do a quick overview in case you didn't go through any of those other lessons. So here we have our Stamp Tool, and then we have no tool presets defined for this current tool. And if you're not seeing that, it's probably because you have this turned off and this is what you have. So don't worry about that. There's nothing really in here for this particular tool. All our other options are right here. So from here we can access some options for adjusting our brush size, the hardness, and choosing other types of brush tips. When it comes to using the Stamp Tool, I prefer just using a soft round or hard round brush tip depending on what I'm trying to retouch. Here we can access our brush settings. Alright, so right next to that we do have a new tool option that we haven't talked about previously because it's only available for the Stamp Tool as well as our healing brush tools. So once you click on that, you're going to get a new panel. It's called Clone Source. And I can try and explain what it does, but it'd be better to show you. So we're going to go over this in this lesson once I begin to show you how to use the tool, and then it's going to make much more sense versus me trying to explain what it does. Okay, so next to that we have some options for using our blending modes. We can adjust the opacity. This option here is for those that use tablets. Flow, again, flow will allow you to build up your brush strokes or the amount of ink or pixels being applied to a certain area. We have our Airbrush tool, again, another tool for our tablets. And then aligned, you can either activate or deactivate. And I'm going to show you how that works because it's going to be easier to show you versus explaining it. And then sample, this is what you're going to use when you're working non-destructively. So if you're working directly on your background layer, then you're not going to really need to worry about the sample layers. If you're working non-destructively and you're adding layers to work on versus the background layer directly, then you're going to want to adjust some of these options in here. And I'm going to show you again how that works in just a minute. And this also works with the sample layers as well. And then finally, we do have our last option here, which is again for the pressure for your mouse cursor when being applied with a tablet. All right, so let me show you how to use this tool and explain some of these other options up here as well, so you get a better idea of what you can do with this particular tool. Now, as I mentioned previously, we're using a brush in order to use the stamp tool. So what exactly can we do with the stamp tool? Well, the stamp tool is used to do retouching. So you can sample or copy from other areas of your image to cover up other areas, or you can use it to duplicate as well. So let me show you how to use it to remove something. So let's say we have these 3 pelicans and we want to get rid of one of them, or maybe you have a portrait and the person has a lot of blemishes on their face. Well, you can use this stamp tool the same way to remove blemishes. In order to copy or sample from a specific area on your image, the first thing you need to do is you need to tell Photoshop, okay, we want to copy from here. Now to do that, we have to hold down our Alt or Option key, and when we do, our icon changes from a round brush to a target icon. So you can take that target icon anywhere on your image that you want to sample from, or to tell Photoshop, clone or copy from here. Once you get that icon, click in that area you want to clone from. I just clicked right here, and then you will notice inside the brush, the area that you're copying or sampling from will be added to the inside of the brush. Kind of hard to see right now, but it's there, and it's kind of like an overlay. So if I go over this pelican right here, we can see what's inside the brush now, which is a copy of this area over here. And now I can click and brush over that area to remove that bird. So I'm going to undo that with Command or Control and the letter Z. Now, in order to copy this bird, we do the same thing. We hold down our Alt or Option key, take the target icon and click on the bird. And now we've just sampled that area with our brush. And when I move it, we're going to get an overlay that we sampled. So now I can click and I add the bird, but we didn't add the entire bird. We're missing part of the bird. And that's because we need to paint that entire area. So when I do, wherever I clicked, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a little plus icon under that bottom bird right there. And that's where Photoshop is cloning from. So if I continue up here in this area, we can see that plus icon is being applied to the bottom of that area, and it's sampling that area to clone our image from, and then it adds it to where I'm applying it in the brush up here. So if we undo that, you can see where I applied the brush. So 2 things. One, I have aligned selected, and when you have a line selected, you can continue painting based on the distance between where you sampled and where you're applying it. So I'm going to sample this bird, and I'm going to go way up here and add them up here. Now look at where the plus icon is under the bird. It's sampling and cloning from that area. If I move down here, look how far that plus icon is now compared to where it was when we first sampled this bird. So aligned will keep the distance between where you clone or sample from and where you apply the brush exactly the same as you continue working on the document. So let's go ahead and turn that off. and this time it's going to work differently. So I'm going to sample this bird again. I'm going to place the bird up here, and then when I release and go to paint somewhere else, it's still cloning from that same area. It's not cloning from a new place. So back again, aligned, turned on, sampled, bird, move, and now I'm not cloning the bird like we did over here. So that's the difference between aligned, activated, and deactivated. All right, let me show you clone source. We're going to turn on this clone source panel, and we can see right here this first icon is selected, and it says o27.jpg, which is just basically the file name. Okay, and if we take a look at what's inside of the brush, there's nothing inside of the brush right now. There's actually just the tan area with all the different pixels inside of it. But if we click on this icon here, we can see that the overlay is completely different. If I click on this icon, there's nothing inside of it because we have not applied a cloned area to this icon here. So these are like presets that you can save your cloned areas from into these areas so you don't have to go back and retarget them as a cloned source. So I can come over here with my Alt or Option key and click on this bird, and now this icon will have that cloned area in the brush, and I can always go back to a different one to select a different cloned area from the image. So this helps speed up your workflow when you're retouching your images and you're working in different areas. Instead of going back and retargeting another area, maybe you want to reuse an area that you've targeted before and you need that exact precise location. Well, you can save them within the clone source. The other thing we can do, actually I'm going to make this brush larger so I can clone this entire bird. And the other thing we can do is we can actually turn off this show overlay, and now the bird is gone, and this helps with retouching when what you're applying or targeting or cloning is getting in the way of retouching. So you can turn on or off the overlay if needed. The other thing you can do is you can rotate what's inside of that cloned area by adjusting this number right here. So as you can see, I just rotated that bird, and now when I apply that cloned area, it's going to be rotated. So again, this helps you align your cloned areas with other areas that you're retouching with, and makes it much easier versus trying to do it with other tools and techniques. So it's just another quick way of helping you retouch. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the original image again, because the one thing we want to do is we want to work non-destructively. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer, and if I wanted to retouch an image and say get rid of 2 of the 3 pelicans, I use my Alt or Option key and then I paint over that area. But if I do it on the original background layer and I come back tomorrow and I decide I want those birds back, well, if I saved it as a JPEG file, guess what? You're not going to get those birds back or whatever it is that you removed. So working non-destructively will allow you to still remove the objects or the blemishes or whatever it is you want to remove, but do so non-destructively. So right now, I just applied those edits to this layer here, but we can see in the thumbnail that those birds are still there. So if I turn this off, we can see that the birds are still intact in the original layer. So it's just covering up the areas that we retouched, but doing it on a separate layer. And then when you save it as a PSD file, that gives you the option to make adjustments later on if needed. Now, in order to work with these new layers, you want to make sure that you have all layers selected for the sample option. If you have current layer only, then it's not going to work. You can see that the icon has changed and it's not going to allow us to make any changes. So if you're seeing that, that's why you're not able to make any adjustments yet. So current layer would be, if you have 10, 15, 20 different layers, well, you can go through and sample through different layers. If you just want to work on a specific layer, then you're going to select current layer and below. In this case, we only have 2 layers, so it is only going to sample from this one. But if we had 20 more layers up here or below it, then we could select all layers. So depending on what you're trying to retouch and how many layers you have, you may need to come up here and make sure that you have either current and below or all layers. Hello and welcome back. All right, so in this section, we're going to go over some more retouching tools. There are a total of 5 tools, all of which are used for retouching your images. They're placed separately from the stamp tools because they apply the retouching of your image differently. And we're going to go over those differences in this lesson. So here we have our healing tools, and we have our spot healing brush tool, the healing brush tool, patch tool, content aware move tool, and our red eye removal tool. So real quick, here's a overview of the main differences between the healing brush tool and the stamp tool. Instead of sampling an exact copy, the healing tools will sample the texture, the colors, and the pixels of an area of the image versus making an exact copy. Then the healing tools will blend that information that it sampled from over the area being retouched, and it will blend it in much more naturally versus the stamp tool. Now, depending on which healing tool you select will determine if you need to physically sample an area of the photo like we do with our stamp tool, or depending on the tool, Photoshop will do it for you automatically. Now, the healing tools almost sound perfect, and in a way, the healing tools are much more advanced and do provide better results most of the time. Now, there's going to be times when the stamp tool will do a much better job, and I'm going to show you an example of that in this lesson. So we're going to go over both the spot healing brush tool and the healing brush tool in this lesson, and then we're going to go over the other 3 healing tools in the next 3 lessons. Now, all 5 tools, depending on which one you selected last, can be accessed with the same keyboard shortcut, which is the letter J, or if you need to choose a different keyboard shortcut, just come over here to the toolbar to select the different tool that you need. Now, just like any other tool that you select, you will find some options up here for that particular tool, and each one of the different tools in here will have different options. So let's go ahead and start with the healing brush tool first, and then we'll go ahead and use it on this image. So we do have some common options up here that we've learned about from previous lessons. So we're not going to go into detail about all of the options. We do have our blending modes here. We do have options to either source a sampled area, or we can sample from a pattern. So right here, this is just a little bit different than the stamp tool where you couldn't choose one or the other for that particular tool. Unless you chose the pattern stamp tool, then you could select a pattern. Just a regular stamp tool just samples or copies exactly. So the healing tool gives you an option. Most of the time, because we are retouching images, we're just going to use sampled. We also have aligned, which will determine if the sampled area stays where we selected it the first time, or it may move with the brush depending on where we're working on our image. Typically, I leave that turned on because I want the sampled area to stay with the brush. And I do that because most of the time that sampled area is going to be aligned with an area that I want to retouch with anyways. Next, we have current and below, which is our sampled layers. So if we're working non-destructively, we're going to use current and below, or we can use all layers or current layer if you're not working non-destructively. Now, if you do use adjustment layers as you're working non-destructively, which are these layers here, then you can turn them off so that nothing is being sampled from those layers with this icon right here. And then we have our tablet option, and then diffusion. And then our diffusion slider will control how quickly the pasted region adapts to the surrounding area. So as you're retouching, you can adjust it to blend in that area much quicker or slower, depending on what you're retouching. As a general guideline, you want lower slider values for images with a lot of grain or fine details, whereas higher values are good for smooth images. So typically I'll just leave it at the default of around 5, and I just find that works best for portraits. All right, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so we can go ahead and start removing some blemishes on this portrait. So the first thing we need to do is we need to tell Photoshop where we want to sample information from. So I'm going to typically sample areas that are similar to the areas that I want to retouch. So basically right around this area for the eye, and because I have aligned turned on, then it's going to keep it in that general area. So I'm just going to click right here, and then I'm going to click on top of one of the blemishes, and it's automatically going to remove that blemish. Now the only thing is I want to work non-destructive, so I'm going to go ahead and undo that with Command or Control and the letter Z. I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer, and I'm going to go ahead and redo that. And then I just need to go over each one of the different areas to remove that blemish. And if I need to, I can always hold down my Alt or Option key to select a new sampled area to retouch from. So the main difference between this and the stamp tool is the way that the information is being taken from the area being sampled, and the stamp tool is copying those pixels exactly, whereas the healing brush tools will take that sampled area and take the texture and the colors of the pixels and blend it in with the area that's being retouched, and it tends to give you much more natural, realistic results, and in general the results are much better. But I'm going to show you an example of when it's not going to work. So let's go ahead and take a look at our next tool, which is our Spot Healing Brush tool. And it does have some different options up here, so we're going to go over those. But first, I just want to mention that with this particular tool, you do not have to tell Photoshop where to sample the information from. If you hold down your Alt or Option key, the icon does change, but when you go to select an area to sample from, you're going to get a little warning that says that the Healing Brush tool will automatically sample pixels to correct a spot with one step. So if you do want to set the area and you don't want Photoshop to decide for you, then you need to reselect the Healing Brush tool. All right, let's go ahead and do a brief overview of these different options up here so we have a better understanding of what these options are, and then we'll go ahead and do some more retouching. So the Spot Healing tool has three basic modes that you can work with. And they each will give you a different way that the area that you're retouching gets filled in with information. With Content Aware, this option will allow Photoshop to intelligently select the best option to fill in the area that you're trying to retouch. The Create Texture mode works slightly different than Content Aware. With this one, it's going to read the information that it's trying to copy from to blend in with, and it's going to generate a texture pattern from that sampled area. So it's going to help blend it in a little bit better than maybe the Content Aware option. And then we have Proximity Match. This particular mode is going to analyze the pixels and the information around the area that you're painting to identify the best area to sample from for the information to fill in. Okay, so real quick, Content Aware, Photoshop is going to do its magic and fix the area that you want to retouch. Create Texture is going to take more texture information to try and blend it in a little bit better. Proximity Match is going to take an area close to the area that you're trying to retouch and try and blend it in. So all three options give you a different way to try and retouch what you're retouching, and they're all going to give you different results. So it's probably best to show you how each one of these will give you different results. So let's go ahead and make sure we have Content Aware selected, and we'll start with that tool. Let's first go ahead and create a new layer so we can work on a new layer to keep everything separated from each other. That way you can turn them on and off later to compare the results. Let's go ahead and rename these layers as well so that we can keep them separated. So this first one, we used our Healing Brush tool. So I'm going to name it Healing Brush tool. And then this next layer, I'm going to name it Content Aware. And then we'll create new layers for each one of the different options. Okay, I'm going to use my spacebar key to access my hand icon so I can navigate to another part of the image. And I'm just going to paint over this little blemish right here. We don't need to hold down our Alt or Option key because with this tool, Photoshop is going to automatically sample an area from the image. It's going to use its advanced technology to figure out an area to sample from automatically. And you're going to find out that 99% of the time it picks out an area that works. So as you can see, I'm just painting over these blemishes and Photoshop is getting it right. Now if it doesn't, I can always click back over that area again so that it samples a different area to try and blend it in. And that's how you use the Spot Healing Brush tool with Content Aware. All right, I'm going to create a new layer and name it Create Texture. Let's go ahead and select the Create Texture option, and let's go ahead and paint over some blemishes. So as you can see, the results are pretty much the same. It is taking in different information and applying texture, and actually you can see that right there. I'm guessing that's from the eyebrows, the way that it looks right there. So it is creating a texture in the area, but you may not want a texture on skin that's going to be sampled from the hair. So if we go back to Content Aware, we can then go ahead and paint that over to fix it. So you may have to flip back and forth between the three options to find the best results if you're not getting the results that you want. I tend to find that Content Aware works the majority of the time, and that's the one that I'm always working with. All right, let's go ahead and find some other blemishes here, and let's create a new layer for Proximity Match. Go ahead and select Proximity Match, and let's go ahead and remove some blemishes. Again, it's removing the blemishes just like it did the other two options. So again, it's just a matter of choosing which one works best for you, and if it's not working, just pick out a different option. Now, if we get closer to the edge of the skin right here, we can see that it's pretty dark right here, and then we have some light areas here and light areas here. So with Proximity Match, what it's going to do is it's going to take the information around this blemish or where we're applying that brush, and it's going to take that information into consideration to blend it in. Problem is, when you get into areas like this, it's not going to work as well versus maybe the other two options. So I'm going to undo that with Command or Control and the letter Z. Let's go ahead and try Create Texture. It blended it in better, but it's much lighter versus the surrounding area, so that tool does not work either. Let's try Content Aware and see what that does. That worked a lot better. There's a few spots here that I might want to keep going over until it blends in a little bit better, but that was probably the best option of the three for that area. Now let's take a look at an area where maybe none of them will work. So let's say our client was self-conscious about this patch of hair right here, and he wants this removed. I'm going to go ahead and increase my brush size just a little bit to cover a little bit more of the area. Content Aware is still selected, and I'm going to go ahead and paint over this area. Now, as you can see, it didn't really remove it as well as some of the other blemishes that we worked on. So let's try Create Texture. Again, we have a nice dark patch right here, so that didn't work. Let's try Proximity Match. And that didn't work either. So what it's doing is it's taking in the information around the pixels on either side and trying to blend it in, but it's not really working. We want more of the pixels and the texture and the colors from this side since there's brick behind the hair here. So in this case, none of the three options really work, and that's when we have to switch to our Stamp tool, and we can do that with the letter S. Hold down our Alt or Option key, sample an area, and then we can cover that area up and remove the hair from that area. So that works a lot better versus the Healing Brush tool, and it's just a matter of switching back and forth between the different tools until you get the result you want. Not any one tool is going to magically fix 100% of your blemishes or whatever you're trying to retouch all the time. Some tools will work better than others in different situations. It's just a matter of knowing how each one of the tools work and their limitations, and then you know what other tools you can go to fix what you need to fix. So far, we've used a couple different tools that required using a brush to retouch with, and we did that with our Stamp tool and our first two Healing Brush tools. This next tool is not being applied with a brush. This is our Patch tool, and in order to retouch with it, we need to make a selection, and then we drag that selection to an area to sample from to retouch with. So I'm going to show you how to use this patch tool in this lesson. So let's go over some of the options first. So up here, you're going to see all these little different squares, and these are basically options for allowing you to either add to the selection, subtract from the selection, or to intersect with the selection to fine-tune that selection. We also have a normal and a content aware option, and if you have normal selected, the options are different versus content aware. So source and destination will do the opposite of each other. Source will work normally. In other words, you'll make your selection and then you'll drag it to an area that you want to copy from. Destination will in turn take that selection and copy it to an area that you want, but it's also going to try and blend it in a little bit, and you can use the transparent option here to blend it in a little bit more. So I'm going to show you how to use each one of these different options. We also have a pattern option if we want to apply a pattern to our selection. And right now it's not turned on because we don't have a selection. And then we also have our diffusion option, which we talked about in the last lesson. So if we select content aware, which is the one that I use the majority of the time, this will act more like the spot healing brush tool in that it's going to work more intelligently, and Photoshop's going to magically decide which options and which textures and colors are best in order to blend in the retouching. And then structure will give you options for determining how intense those particular textures and colors are being applied to do the retouching. So you can increase it or decrease it for a more intense type of retouching depending on what you're trying to achieve and whether or not it's actually giving you the results that you want. And then you have the option to adjust how much the source of the selection is being applied in regards to the color. And this gives you an option for modifying those options. So again, this is just tweaking your patch tool in order to give you the results that you want. So let's go ahead and create a new layer so we can work non-destructively. And I'll go ahead and show you how to use this tool. So let's say the parent of this young man here was not happy that he wore a specific t-shirt, and let's say it was very offensive and she wants it removed. Well, we could use our stamp tool in conjunction with our healing brush tools to remove all this information right here. But it's going to take a long time to go in and stamp out and heal all these different areas. So the patch tool is a much better tool for the job because it allows you to patch or fix a larger area much faster. So let me show you how this works. I'm going to stay in the content aware mode for now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a selection around this part of the emblem. And once I reconnect where I started, you get these little dancing ants. And then if we take a look at the icon now, we have an arrow and then the little patch icon. If I place my tool inside of the selection, we get another arrow that's pointing to the right. So that lets you know that now you want to move this selection to another area that you want to sample and use as the base for retouching that area. So I'm going to click inside and then drag it to another part of the t-shirt, and we can see that information is being copied to that area inside of the overlay right here. So you want to make sure you align it up with another part of the t-shirt that matches the threads and the color and the texture for that particular image. Because if I come over here to the lighter area, that's not going to blend in as well because it's much brighter over here versus what's right below it. So I'm going to release my mouse button right here, and then it's going to magically blend in this part of the shirt and cover up this area of the shirt. So if we turn this layer off, we can see that it magically removed that part of the emblem, and it did a pretty good job. We may need to go in and retouch up some of the edges sometimes, and we can do that with our other healing brush tools. But for now, I think you get the idea of how this works, and we're not going to spend a lot of time making this perfect. I just want to show you how to use the tool. All right, so let's go ahead and make another selection around West 49. And let's go ahead and move it to a location to copy from. And again, you want to make sure that the folds and the lines line up so that it blends in much better. Once I release, it then goes ahead and blends it in. So I can see an outline right here that I need to tweak with additional healing brush tools. But again, it removed the majority of it fairly well. I'm going to go ahead and undo that with Command or Control and the letter Z. And that only takes me back one step. So I need to go to my history panel to go back to a prior point in time. So I just want to bring it back to the way it was before. And let's go ahead and adjust structure to 7 and color to 10 and see if that gives us better results. So again, just outline it. And let's go ahead and move this into place. And it didn't really do much of a better job. It actually did worse. So in this case, you may need to make adjustments to the structure to go lower versus higher. And let's bring color back down again. So again, it didn't do a really good job. I think the default settings of 3 worked a lot better. So again, it's just a matter of going in and fine-tuning and tweaking the options up here in order to get best results, or just switch to another tool to blend in the edges if needed. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn this layer off and create a new layer. And I'm going to show you the limitations of this particular tool. Now, it is nice that it can fix a large area, but sometimes too much is too much. So I'm going to select the entire thing, and let's say we just want to get rid of this whole thing at once. Well, if I click and I drag this down here because I want to sample this area, we can notice that the selection is getting smaller and smaller because I'm getting closer to the edge of the image and it's not allowing me to sample from that area. If I try this area over here, it does the same thing. Well, let's go ahead and try over here. Well, this isn't going to work either because it's much brighter than this side of the image. So it does have limitations in that you can't always select the entire thing. You have to do it in pieces in order to get best results. All right, let's zoom back in here. And let me show you something else. I'm going to go ahead and select this as well. But let's say I was in too big of a hurry and I didn't select everything. Well, we can come up here and select one of these other options to either add to it or to remove from the selection. Or I can use my keyboard shortcuts. The Shift key will give me the option to add to it. And we can see that there's a little plus icon next to the patch tool now. If I select my Alt or Option key, then it's going to remove from the selection. So maybe I want to get in a little tighter here and remove. With my Shift key, I can go ahead and select around it to add more. The last option is called Intersect. So if I hold down both my Shift and Alt or Option key, the icon adds a little X, and that means if we make a new selection that intersects with other parts of the selection, it's going to reduce that selection to the area that I draw out for that selection. So it's intersecting with other parts that have been selected. I really don't use that particular option that much. I tend to use the Shift or the Alt or Option key to add or remove as needed. Now, if we take a look at normal, let's create a new layer again. This one is going to allow us to basically work the same way as before, but we cannot work non-destructively. So even though we try to move the selection to sample an area from, it's not going to let us do that because this particular layer has no pixels in it. So the only way to work with normal is to work destructively. And as you know, that's not what I recommend. Now, if you do want to do this on the background layer and you're wondering what destination is, well, that's basically going to do the opposite, and it's going to take that selection and copy it to wherever you place it, and then it's going to blend it in. It blended in the edge of it a little bit right here, And then you can use transparent as well to help blend it in even more. So that gives you another option for maybe duplicating something on the image and then blending it in with the new pixels where you place it. And then if you choose Use Pattern, it's going to fill in the pattern that you select into the selection. I never ever use normal, so I typically just leave it on Content Aware, and then I'll go ahead and use the Patch Tool that way. All right, so those are the basics of how to use the Patch Tool for removing larger areas of your image that need to be retouched. In the next lesson, we're going to go over another retouching tool, which is the Content Aware Move tool. So if you want, go ahead and practice with this particular tool first, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Hello and welcome back. All right, so in this lesson, we're going to go over the Content Aware Move tool, which works very similar to the Patch tool, except you're going to make your selection outside of the area that you want to retouch versus selecting what needs to be retouched. So I'm going to show you how to use this Content Aware Move tool in this lesson. So the options are pretty much the same. We have ways to add or remove from our selection. We do have a new option here to either move or extend that selection that we make prior to applying it to that particular area that we need to retouch. It just provides two different ways of applying that information and blending it in. We do have structure and color, and we also have transform on drop, which will allow you to transform or resize the selection that you made prior to committing it to that area where you want to retouch. We also have an option to sample all layers if we're working non-destructively, which I do. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer, and then we can turn on or turn off all sample layers. If you keep it turned off, then it's not going to work because it's not going to be able to sample any of the layers that you need to get that information from. So let's go ahead and turn that back on. We'll keep everything else set at the defaults, and we'll go ahead and put the mode at move for now. All right, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in with my zoom tool. And here's how it works differently. Instead of selecting the area that needs to be retouched, we select an area outside of that, and then we place it over the area that needs to be retouched. So it's basically the opposite of the Patch tool. So I select a part of the shirt, and then I can drag that over the area where I want to apply it. Once I release the mouse button, I'm going to get a transform tool, which will allow me to resize as needed. I never really find that works out very well because the pixels inside it get larger or smaller and don't tend to blend in with the rest of the area. At least that's my experience. And again, I don't really use this tool. I just use the Patch tool. I find it's a lot easier and quicker to use versus the Content Aware tool. But I just want to share with you another tool in case you can't get one of the other tools to do what you need it to do. So to commit this selection to this location, I just click my return key or my enter key, and then it's going to blend in that area. All right, let's go ahead and go back in time here. And let's go ahead and turn off transform on drop because that's something I don't think is very useful. And once we reapply a new selection and place it over, it then updates that area with that new selection and it blends it in. All right, now we could try and pick out a larger area, but just like with the Patch tool, it's not going to blend in very well because it's much lighter over here, it's darker over here, there's a little bit of a crease, so it's not all going to line up perfectly and blend in very well. But you also notice down here, it moved that particular selection down here as well. If I undo that, we can see how the shirt down in this area changed as well to try and blend it all in to make it look as natural as possible. Now, if we compare that to extend, it's going to give us a different result. So I'm going to basically make the same selection here and move it into this location. And this time it's just updating this part of the shirt and not down here. All right, so that's how you use the Content Move Aware tool. Again, it's one of those tools that you're going to need to practice with and experiment with it to see if it's going to give you better results than the Patch tool. But I find that the Patch tool works much better versus the Content Aware tool.